On the night of May 31st, 1921, in the city of Tulsa, Oklahoma, a deputy sheriff named Bart Stanley handed a Winchester rifle to a steel worker named Laurel Buck. The order was simple: shoot any Negro he could find. Buck took the rifle, walked 4 blocks west to the Frisco Railroad tracks, and waited with the patience of a man who had been promised authority and meant to use every minute of it. 18 hours later, 35 blocks of the Greenwood district lay in ash, and the thing that had been the prosperous heart of Black America in Oklahoma was gone. Between 100 and 300 Black Americans were dead, depending on whose count you choose to believe, and the most reliable historians today say 200. 1,200 homes were gone. 9,000 people were homeless. The fire took 6 hospitals to the ground, including 2 of only 3 Black-staffed hospitals in Oklahoma. The white deputies had armed themselves at the courthouse. The men of Greenwood had gathered at the offices of the Tulsa Star at the corner of Greenwood and Archer to decide what to do. And the air on the Frisco Railroad tracks that physically separated Black Tulsa from white Tulsa smelled of crude oil from the Cushing Drumright refineries 40 miles to the southwest, while the whole city held its breath. Just past midnight, on the lawn of the Tulsa County Courthouse, a single shot fired into the night air. The wall came down then. This is the story of the most successful destruction of a Black community in American history. It is also the story of the most disciplined act of forgetting that followed. And the second one took longer than the first. Both took planning. Both succeeded. Greenwood, in the spring of 1921, was 35 city blocks of brick, of mortar, of ambition, and of the particular arithmetic that says when a man cannot bank in the white half of the city, he opens his own bank, and when the white grocer will not deliver to him, he opens his own grocery. And the result, after 33 years of doing this with the discipline of people who knew exactly what they were building, was something that did not exist anywhere else in America at that time and will likely not exist in that form again. In April 1921, a month before the burning, the dedication of Mount Zion Baptist Church took place on Easter Sunday. The new building cost $92,000. The congregation had taken on 28 years of debt to build it. And inside, on that April morning, the light came through new stained glass windows imported from Munich and fell on 600 parishioners seated in pews that still smelled of the cabinet maker's oil. The roof was shingle and beam. 3 months later, it would be open to the sky. On the same 8 blocks of Greenwood Avenue, between Archer and Pine, the daily life of a Black middle-class neighborhood ran the way Booker T. Washington had said it should run. 52 grocery stores, 22 churches, 15 physicians' offices, 1 full hospital, 2 newspapers, the Tulsa Star edited by A.J. Smitherman and the Oklahoma Sun published weekly by Theodore Baldwin. The Stratford Hotel, owned and operated by J.B. Stratford, the son of a Kentucky slave who had walked north to freedom in 1861 and built a small empire of 3 brick floors over the next 60 years, ran 65 rooms, and was, in 1921, the largest Black-owned hotel in America. The Dreamland Theater on Greenwood, between Archer and Cameron, seated 800 people in tilted velveteen seats. And that May the Marquis was advertising the silent Western The Sage Hen. Booker T. Washington had called it Black Wall Street. The real estate values inside Greenwood ran higher per square foot than the white commercial district along Main Street, 3 blocks south across the Frisco tracks. And Tulsa was the oil capital of the world. And Greenwood was where some of the oil money found Black hands. The white half of the city had not entirely accepted that. If you had stood at the corner of Greenwood and Archer on the warm evening of May 30th, 1921, you would have heard a phonograph playing through the open window of Carrie Brown's confectionery. You would have smelled fresh bread cooling on the racks at McKeever's Bakery on the next block. And you would have seen the sun setting behind the Drexel Building 3 blocks south across the Frisco tracks at 319 South Main Street. The Drexel Building is where it started. The first thing to understand about Dick Rowland is that he was 19 years old. The second is that he had no shoes when the police walked into his mother's house and arrested him. The third is that he was, by the most plausible evidence, completely innocent. The official record runs as follows. On the morning of May 30th, Memorial Day, Rowland entered the Drexel building at 319 South Main Street to use the colored restroom, the only one in downtown Tulsa where black men could relieve themselves. The elevator operator was a 17-year-old white girl named Sarah Page, who had been on the job for 6 weeks and was known among the other operators to dislike the work. The elevator car operated by hand, depending on a mechanical lever rather than a button, and it was widely known to lurch when the operator misjudged the floor stop. A clerk on the first floor heard a scream, looked up, and saw Rowland leave the building in a hurry. But Page never filed a complaint, and Rowland did not run home. The next day, on the morning of May 31st, Tulsa police walked into Rowland's mother's house and arrested him anyway. What happened in that elevator, we will never know with certainty. The most plausible reconstruction, drawn from the 2001 report of the Oklahoma Commission to study the Tulsa race riot, is that Rowland tripped on the way out of the car. His hand caught Page's arm to steady himself, and Page, startled, screamed. He fled because he was a black man in 1921 Oklahoma, and a white woman had just screamed in an enclosed space, and he understood, as every black man in the state understood, that the next several hours would not be about what had actually happened. The Tulsa Tribune of May 31st, 1921, ran the front page headline, "Nab Negro for Attacking Girl in Elevator," and the Tribune later destroyed every copy of that day's run from its bound archives. Mary E. Jones Parrish, a black schoolteacher who had moved to Greenwood for the work, kept her copy at home. Without her copy, we would not now know that the headline ever ran. There was reportedly also an editorial in the same edition titled "To Lynch Negro Tonight," and although no copy of that editorial has survived, multiple witnesses, including Walter F. White of the NAACP, who arrived in Tulsa within days as an undercover investigator, recorded the headline as fact in his 1921 dispatches to the New York Evening Post. By 6 o'clock that evening, 300 white men were on the courthouse lawn. Word reached Greenwood by telephone at 7. The men of the district who had served in the First World War, who had seen Belleau Wood and the Argonne, and had brought home the conviction that the war taught them what they were capable of doing in defense of their lives, who had been welcomed back to America in 1919 with a wave of lynchings across 25 American cities in what historians now call the Red Summer, did not need anyone to translate the inflammatory headline for them. They organized. By 9 in the evening, 75 black men, many of them armed with Springfield rifles brought home from France, marched the 4 blocks south, across the Frisco tracks, to the Tulsa County Courthouse, and offered their services to Sheriff Willard McCullough, a man of conflicted but ultimately decent intentions, who told them he had Rowland safe in a holding cell on the top floor and did not need their help. The crowd by that hour had grown to almost 2,000 and was openly demanding that McCullough hand Rowland over for what every man on the lawn understood was about to be a lynching. The black veterans returned to Greenwood, and they did not believe the matter was finished, and they were correct. At 10:30, a second contingent of 25 black men returned to the courthouse, having heard rumors that the sheriff had been overrun. They came as escorts, not provocateurs, but a white man with a pistol approached one of them and demanded the rifle the black man was carrying. The black man refused. There was a struggle for the weapon, and a single shot fired into the night air carried far enough that within the next breath, before any name had been said or any order given, the lawn became a battlefield. 12 men died in the next 10 minutes, 10 of them white and 2 of them black, and the black contingent retreated north across the Frisco tracks, fighting a running rearguard engagement back into Greenwood. Behind them, the white mob did not chase, it deputized. Sheriff McCullough later testified that the Tulsa Police Department had given guns and badges to at least 500 white men in the hour after midnight. The official record says 400. Some survivors interviewed by Walter F. White said 1,000. The exact number does not matter, because what matters is that the city of Tulsa, by 5 hours after midnight on June 1st, 1921, had armed an extra-legal militia and ordered it to take Greenwood. The attack began at dawn. A whistle blew at 5:08 in the morning. From the railroad bridge over the Frisco tracks at Detroit Avenue, from the rooftop of the Middle States Milling Company on Boulder Street, from rifle positions along Cincinnati Avenue, a coordinated rifle fire opened on Greenwood Avenue with the steadiness of men who had agreed on the plan in advance. The white attackers moved into the district in 3 columns, advancing west to east up the side streets, while a 4th contingent of at least 200 men opened fire from the railroad embankment to keep any black resident from running south to the white half of the city. They were organized. Some of them carried Browning automatic rifles taken without authorization from the National Guard Armory at McNulty Park. Others carried police-issue revolvers, kerosene cans, and pine torches that they had bound together at the courthouse in the small hours of the morning. The first building they set on fire was the Midway Hotel on Greenwood, near Archer. The second was the offices of the Tulsa Star, where editor A.J. Smitherman had spent the entire night arguing in print that the sheriff would do his duty and protect Roland. By 6 in the morning, smoke from Greenwood was visible to motorists on the Sapulpa Road, 20 miles south of Tulsa. By 7, the columns had reached the residential streets, and at every corner of Detroit Avenue, Easton, Hartford, and Independence, the same scene played out. The men with the torches forced families out of their houses at gunpoint. They took whatever the families could carry and threw it in piles in the middle of the street. Then they burned the houses. If you had been on Hartford Avenue at 6:30 that morning, you would have seen an elderly tailor named Reverend J.H. Hill leading his wife out of his front door with a small wooden case held against his chest. The case held the deed to their property. He had built the house with his own hands in 1909, brick by brick, and he was 67 years old that summer. The men with the torches did not let him take anything else, and then they shot him on his own porch in front of his wife. Eyewitness accounts that Mary Parrish collected for her 1922 book, Events of the Tulsa Disaster, described the next 2 hours from inside the houses. Some black men, the WWI veterans among them, fired back from second-story windows and from the flat roof of the Williams Building at the corner of Greenwood and Archer. Several of the white attackers fell. Parrish writes of one moment that morning. There were so many of them that we could see they were not afraid, and that what they were doing was not in any sense self-defense, but a plan. The columns advanced anyway. By 8 in the morning, the line had reached Standpipe Hill at the district's geographic center, and Greenwood Avenue itself was on fire from end to end. What I have just described to you was the standard scope of an American massacre in 1921. Wilmington, 1898, East St. Louis, 1917, Elaine, Arkansas, 1919. The mob, the deputization, the houses, the running, the 10-to-1 ratio of dead, the fire. None of this, by the grim accounting of the era, was exceptional. What came next was, at 7:30 in the morning of June 1st, 1921, a 42-year-old black lawyer named Buck Colbert Franklin, who would later become the father of the historian John Hope Franklin, sat in the basement of his law office at 124 Greenwood Avenue. With 2 clerks and 1 client, he refused to leave behind. He had been awake since the first whistle. From the basement window, he could see the southern end of Greenwood Avenue burning, and above the smoke, against the early morning sky, he saw the planes. The planes were biplanes, surplus Curtiss JN-4 Jenny trainers from the Great War, owned by Tulsa businessmen who had bought them at federal auction in 1919 and used them since for crop dusting and short hauls out of Curtiss Southwest Airport, 3 miles south of the city. From the open cockpits, men leaned out and dropped what Franklin's manuscript later called small balls of fire. Some of those small balls of fire were nitroglycerin, sealed into Folger's coffee tins. Some were ordinary kerosene torches, lashed to bricks. Some were quarter sticks of dynamite, scavenged from a construction site near the Tulsa Cotton Compress. The planes circled low enough that Franklin could read the registration numbers painted on the fuselages. Franklin's manuscript was lost for 84 years. A Tulsa addict gave it up in 2015, and the Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture holds it today in its permanent collection. He wrote, "Lurid flames roared and belched and licked their forked tongues into the air. Smoke ascended the sky in thick, black volumes, and amid it all the planes, now a dozen or more in number, still hummed and darted here and there with the agility of natural birds of the air. I could see the men in them, and they were laughing." The aerial bombardment of Greenwood was the first time in American history that an American city was attacked from the air by Americans. It happened a quarter of a century before the firebombing of Dresden. It happened on American soil. It happened in 1921. The official 1921 reports denied the planes existed. By noon, the Oklahoma National Guard had arrived from Oklahoma City under the command of Adjutant General Charles F. Barrett, and martial law was declared over the city. The shooting stopped. The fire continued. The Guard's first official act was not to detain the men with the torches, but to round up the surviving black population of Greenwood at gunpoint. Some 6,000 black residents marched, hands above their heads, to internment camps the Guard improvised at Convention Hall on East Brady Street, at McNulty Park on the south side of the city, and at the Tulsa County Fairgrounds west of downtown. Once there, they were required to wear small green tags around their necks, identifying them as free Negroes, before they could leave the camps for any reason at all. White employers came to the gates of the camps and signed for them as if reclaiming property the storm had scattered. Mary Parrish, held with her young daughter at the fairgrounds for 4 days, wrote that the green tag became, for those of us who wore it, a thing we have never spoken of, even between ourselves, since. The fires burned through the day. Mount Zion Baptist Church, dedicated 9 weeks earlier with its imported stained glass and its 28-year mortgage, collapsed at 3 in the afternoon when the south wall gave way under its own weight. The Dreamland Theater fell at 3:30. The Stratford Hotel, 65 rooms, and the largest black-owned hotel in America, came down in stages through the afternoon, and the men with the rifles forced J.B. Stratford himself, 60 years old, from his own building at gunpoint and made him watch it burn from the embankment of the Frisco tracks. By evening, the only intact buildings in Greenwood were the Booker T. Washington High School and a handful of houses on the district's far north edge. The year was 1921, a year before federal insurance regulation would have applied, and the riot exclusion clause in nearly every property policy meant the insurers paid no claims at all. Black property owners had insured their buildings collectively for some $4 million, the equivalent of $70 million today, and they received nothing. The city of Tulsa paid no compensation. The state of Oklahoma paid none. The federal government paid none. A grand jury convened on June 8, 1921. It heard testimony for 12 days. It returned an indictment that named the black community as the cause of the riot, blamed the WWI veterans for arming themselves at the courthouse on the night of May 31st, and concluded with the language that the colored people are responsible. The grand jury disregarded Sheriff McCullough's testimony, which had described in plain terms the deputization of the white mob. The prosecutor did not invite Mary Parrish to testify. The grand jury indicted A.J. Smitherman, the editor of the Tulsa Star, as an insider for publishing, in the days before the riot, the editorial position that lynchings should be resisted by armed force. He fled the state of Oklahoma the day his indictment issued. He died in Buffalo, New York in 1961, still under indictment in Oklahoma. The state did not pardon him until 2007. By 1923, the rebuilding had begun in spite of the city. Black Tulsans bought lumber from suppliers in Wichita who would deliver, and they poured concrete. By 1925, 25% of the lost businesses had been replaced. Greenwood would never be what it had been, however, and the reason was the same reason that had been the engine of the burning. Insurance redlining and zoning restrictions drawn into Tulsa city law and Oklahoma state code by 1925 ensured that black capital could not flow back into Greenwood at the rate it had flowed in before. The forgetting began the next day. The Tulsa Tribune destroyed its May 31st front page from the bound archive, and the Oklahoma Historical Society in Oklahoma City did not file a copy with its 1921 newspaper records. The schools in Tulsa did not teach the riot. The schools in the rest of Oklahoma did not teach it. The schools elsewhere in America did not teach it either. The children of the survivors did not hear about it from their parents, who had been told silence was their best protection, and who had largely come to believe, after the green tags and the indictment, that this was true. By 1950, the burning of Greenwood was not in any Oklahoma history textbook. By 1975, it was not in any American history textbook published in any state of the Union. Walter Cronkite, broadcasting the CBS Evening News from Tulsa on the 50th anniversary in 1971, did not mention it. The 1996 Oklahoma Commission to study the Tulsa race riot of 1921 was the first official inquiry. It took 5 years to do its work. Its findings, published in February 2001, were the first comprehensive accounting from any state body since the 1921 grand jury, and they reversed the grand jury's conclusion. The 2001 commission could not, however, locate the dead. Multiple survivors testified that flatbed trucks had carried bodies out of the city on the night of June 1st to be buried elsewhere. Witnesses described mass burials at Oaklawn Cemetery, at New Block Park, west of the city, and along the banks of the Arkansas River. For 79 years, no one had looked. In October 2020, a backhoe digging a test trench in Oaklawn Cemetery for the Tulsa 1921 Graves Investigation Project struck something hard about 6 feet down. The crew thought it might be old iron plumbing. They were wrong. What the archaeologists from the University of Florida and the city of Tulsa found when they expanded the trench over the next 8 days was a stack of plain pine coffins arranged the way bodies get stacked when there is no time to bury people one at a time. The clothing fragments matched 1921 inventory, and the teeth tested positive against descendant DNA in some cases. The work has continued in the years since. As of late 2024, some matches had come back. Most had not. In late 2024, 3 living survivors of the massacre were still alive. Leslie Benningfield Randall was 109 years old. Viola Ford Fletcher was 110. Hughes Van Ellis had died at the age of 102 the year before. They had testified before the United States Congress on the 100th anniversary in 2021. They had sued the city of Tulsa for reparations under Oklahoma public nuisance law in the same year. The Oklahoma Supreme Court dismissed the lawsuit in June 2024. They had not received $1. That, more than any commission report or memorial plaque or grand jury reversal, is what 1921 took from Greenwood. Not the buildings, not the $4 million in insurance claims that no insurer ever paid. Not the businesses, the homes, the deeds, or the small wooden case that Reverend J.H. Hill carried out onto his porch on the morning of June 1st. The forgetting was the second fire. It burned longer than the first, and it burned what the first one could not reach. A man named Henry Souders, white, an electrician who had lived north of downtown Tulsa his whole life, told the Oklahoma Commission in interviews recorded in 2000 what he had seen as a boy of 9 years on the morning of June 2nd, 1921. His father had taken him by the hand to the corner of Detroit and Easton to look at the smoldering ruins of Greenwood, the way a man takes his son to a battlefield to teach him what victory is supposed to smell like. Souders said this: "I saw a black woman walking down the middle of the street. Her dress was burned to her waist. She was carrying a baby. The baby was not moving. She was not crying. She was just walking. She was not going anywhere in particular. She was just walking." In 2001, Oaklawn Cemetery's records had no entry for that woman, no entry for her baby, and no place in the city's accounting for what she was doing on the morning of June 2nd, or where she went after she walked out of the boy's view. They never will. The earth gave up some of what it took. Most of it, it kept.